Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Adora Yin, and today I'm going to be talking about how I got A stars in 0607 IGCSE International Mathematics and how you can too. So if this is your first time watching one of my YouTube videos, I've been making IGCSE content for a long time now, but basically I took the exams in 2024 May, June. Posted my results, that went semi-viral, and then ever since then I've just been making IGCSE tips videos for every single subject that I've taken. I've literally done videos on like biology, chemistry, physics, computer science, English language, English literature, economics. Oh, and I also did one on additional math. But finally, I will be talking about 0607 International Mathematics today since it's been highly requested. And for this course, it's pretty similar to 0580 Extended Maths, which some people take, except the papers are just slightly different, but you can still watch this video since it will still apply for most of the tips. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get started right now. I do have my laptop here again because I made notes on what I was going to say today, but I just wanted to start off with a paper overview for 0607. So I think most people watching this video are going to be taking the extended version. So for the extended version, you do papers 2, 4, and 6. The core version is 1, 3, and 5, but I think the core version caps your marks, so just like completely take the core version out of your head because you don't need to know all that. So yeah, for the extended version, there's basically just going to be more and harder topics than the core version. So for paper 2, that's going to be your non-calc paper. Paper 4 is going to be your calc paper. And paper 6, which is typically the one people find hardest, is going to be the investigation and modeling paper, which you also have the calculator for. So in this video, I'm just going to be talking about all of these and just tips in general for the syllabus itself. And yeah, I'm just going to start with like general tips, and then I'm going to go into paper 2 and 4 specifically, and then I'm going to go into paper 6 specifically. So I'm going to leave chapters on this video so you can click through and watch what you want to watch, but like I highly advise you to watch this entire video, please. But yeah, let's just get started. So first of all, for the actual syllabus itself, this is along with literally every single IGCSE subject. It's listed in the official Cambridge website, and you can download the one for your year. And in the syllabus, it states literally every single thing that you need to know for maths, and like every single type of calculation that you need to know. And it also says what you don't need to know. So my advice would be to download this entire syllabus and like extract the pages that talk about the syllabus content from it. And depending on what, format you like, you can either print it out and like highlight as you go, or you can just keep it on your laptop and annotate the PDF as you go. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, as long as you keep on updating this copy as you go, doesn't matter how you do it, just do it how you like. So there are 10 topics in this entire syllabus: number algebra, functions, coordinate geometry, mensuration, trig, transformations and vectors, probability, and statistics. However, your teacher is probably not going to be teaching in that exact order. They only just list it in that order on the syllabus because I guess it makes the most sense to them. But usually teachers, they like to jump around and teach sections from one topic and then go off to another topic and then go back to the same topic, just depending on difficulty and like how they teach. So that's why highlighting as you go is really important for the course, just to keep track of every single thing that you know. Also, same goes for the textbook, because the textbook is also not always organized according to the syllabus. And I think teachers pick different textbooks, but I personally used the Snowflake one if anybody is curious, but I don't think it makes that big of a difference because it's still based off the same syllabus. Anyway, moving on to like just generally when you're revising for maths. In all of my videos, I always talk about making notes. However, for math, this is obviously going to be slightly different because math is more of an application-based subject. However, you should still loosely make your notes. And what I did is I just based it off of the syllabus points. So basically, like after my teacher would talk about a subject in class, I would pull up the syllabus points from that and then make notes based on that. So I was always updated on what was going on. And for maths, you don't really need the most complex notes. However, I would say that it's still really good to keep notes of the basic things because it's quite easy to forget the basic things in reality. So just like keep notes on everything just so you can look back on it, because you don't actually know if you're going to forget it in the future. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you do harder things in the future, like harder maths in the future, and then you look back and you realize you forgot some of the simple stuff. So basically, all in all, just keep notes on everything. However, do make more notes or like more in-depth notes on the topics that you do find harder. And obviously for harder topics, it's different to every single individual, but I did list out the topics that I personally found the most challenging out of the entire syllabus, more so because they're like newly introduced to the syllabus. Like it's stuff that they don't teach you in middle school, but then you're like newly getting taught these concepts. But anyway, those are surds, circle theorems, ratios, vectors, and functions, specifically cubic, trig functions, and exponential functions. Now, you don't have to follow this list of hardest topics, but just like look out for those that are just more complex and just see like which ones you find personally more difficult. And still on the topic of making notes, for every single other IGCSE subjects, there's like so much stuff to memorize, right? But obviously for maths, again, this is going to be different. However, there are still things that you do have to memorize. So yeah, just make sure that you have clearer notes for the next few things that I'm going to be talking about. But basically, when you sit your actual exam, for paper 2 and paper 4, they do give you a list of formula. However, this list of formula does not cover everything. But you're going to see this literally just right after the front page on the second page. But basically, this will include all of the area and volume formulas that you need for like the 3D shapes. It'll also include the quadratic equation solution, and it'll also have some of the trig formulas, but clearly not every single formula is listed on this single page. So the ones that you do have to memorize and keep in your head are the trigonometric ratios, which basically what I'm referring to is the table, like the sine, cos, tan table. Also, you need to memorize your rules for indices and also logarithms. You also need to know your surd rules and also completing the square for quadratic equations. And those are just like things that you have to keep in your head along with like all the other like math skills that you have to keep in your head. But like these are like specific, rules and stuff that you have to make sure that you know. And yeah, for these key things that you have to memorize, it is best to just like make a little cheat sheet in your notes that you can look through and reference and make sure that you do get in your head before the actual exam where you don't have that cheat sheet to help you. So yeah, that's all for making notes. But the next most important part of the subject, I would say, is knowing how to use your calculator. And I feel like people don't talk about this enough. So I'm going to tell you, there are so many damn tricks that you can be doing on your calculator. For the actual exam, you can either bring in a scientific calculator or a graphing display calculator, which is a GDC calculator. And you can bring in both if you want, but if you have to choose one, bring your GDC. This is the big boy. It literally has every single function that you need and every additional function that you can use. And as I said, there are so many tricks that you can do on your calculator to make your life so much easier. And honestly, a part of paper 4 and paper 6 is literally just testing your like skills with actually being able to use a calculator. So yeah, in your revision, make sure that you are using your calculator to its max potential, because you can literally do every single thing on this thing. So I made a list of calculator tricks or like features that you should know how to use before your exam. But basically, you just need to be familiar with all of these modes that you have on your calculator that will be useful in the actual exam. So I'm just going to run through them really quickly if your teacher has not taught you this before. But first, for the run matrix one, this is where all the calculations happen, which is like the basic feature of a calculator that you should know how to use. But for the more unique features of a GDC calculator, one is going to be the statistics one, which is number 2 on this calculator. And here you can type in your X and Y values within this table, and then you can make a graph for you, which makes your life a lot easier for like graphing type situations. Also, it can calculate like the formula of your graph based off of the points that you put in, which is also super helpful. And then another key one is the table one, which is the 7th option on this calculator. Oh yeah, this is the FXCG50, by the way. I'm not sure if every single like student uses this one, but it's just the one that my school uses, and I feel like is pretty common. But anyway, for the table function, it's kind of like the opposite of statistics mode, which is how I remember it. But basically for this one, you can put in a formula and then it will generate a table of values for you, which can be super helpful also like when you're checking your answers and stuff. So yeah, just remember that statistics and table are kind of like the swapped functions of each other. And then one of the other most important features is the graph, which is the fifth button here. So here you can obviously just graph all of your lines, and I'm sure you know how to do this already, but this is literally so useful. Also, just make sure that you are like as familiar as possible with all of the things that you can be like checking on your graph. So for example, if I have this simple one here, if you click G-solve here, you can literally see like all the things that you can find. So there's roots, which is like x-intercept. There's max, min for like higher order functions. You can find the y-intercept, and then if you have multiple lines, you can find the intersection. And also if the question is asking you to calculate like f of 2, then you can put in the x value of 2, and then you can get the y value, and you don't have to retype the entire graph equation. So yeah, basically just learning how to use this as quick as possible makes your life a lot easier. And also just make sure that you know how to change the view window and shrink and expand your graph how you need to based off of whatever domain and range is stated in the question. So yeah, there you go for calculator rules. But along with just like knowing how to work your calculator, I did want to caution you guys on one of the more important rounding rules that happens in basically all Cambridge math syllabuses, but specifically for 0607, they care a lot about this. But basically, they're very specific about how they want you to round your numbers. And they do also specify this on the front cover of your exam paper, so you can check back if you forget. But in short, I'm just going to tell you how you should be rounding your answers. But basically, first, check if the question itself that you're doing specifies a rounding for the answer for that question, because sometimes they are very explicit about like they want this many significant figures. If not, then you use the exact number if it is an exact number. So exact numbers are like whole numbers or fractions. But then if it's not an exact number, then you have to round to 3 significant figures. So just make sure that you know your significant figure rounding rules, especially for if it starts with a 0 and there's like leading zeros. So yeah, make sure you know how to do that. And then if it's angles, then it's usually always 1 decimal point for degree answers. So yeah, those are your rounding rules. And the reason why I am talking about this in my calculator section of this video is because typically when you're doing these questions, you're not going to be getting the final answer on your first calculation. It's obviously going to take multiple calculations. But because these rounding rules are so specific and the answer key is also very specific on the rounding, you have to make sure that your intermediate values, which is like the steps before you reach your final answer, they have to have all the decimal points possible to avoid having rounding errors in your final answer, if that makes sense. So what I'm trying to say is that you should only round your final answer. Do not round any of the steps in between. And if you're rounding those steps in between, you could potentially lose marks because you're losing accuracy for your final answer. Like, trust me, these rounding things can add up significantly when it gets to the final answer. So yeah, just trust me on this. And do not round anything until you get to the final answer. And that might sound really annoying because you have to type out like 10 decimal points for every single number, but there are tricks for this, which I'm going to teach you right now. So this is all in the run matrix bit, which is like the main math bit. But if you want to use like the previous value, like I just typed out this really long decimal number. If you want to use this in your next calculation, then you can just use the ans button over here, which is short for answer, and you can sub this into equations. So for example, you can just do like 6 times shift answer, and then whatever else you have to do with your calculation, and it will have that value exactly how it was calculated in the previous one. However, if you have multiple things with lots of decimal places and it's not in like the calculation on your calculator from before, then you can actually store numbers as variables in your calculator. This will make a lot of sense for people who take computer science and like know how variables and stuff works. But if you don't know how it works, basically a variable is like when you store something in a placeholder value that's easier. And what this means for the calculator is that you can store it in a letter. And each of these letters, if you can see here in pink, these letters are your variables. And how you can do this is if you have this long ass number, then you can do answer and then you click this arrow over here and then you can specify which variable in pink that you want to use to store this value in. So if I want to use A, then I click alpha and then this to get to A. And yeah, it shows on the screen there. And then you can just store your values. And then in future calculations, you can just use A, B, C, D, E instead of these 5 million decimal places that you have to type out, which makes your life so much easier and you can thank me later. But anyway, another thing is that if a question has multiple parts and you have to use the final answer in the next part of your question, do not use the rounded value. Like, do not use the 1 to 3 significant figures. Still use the value with like all the rest of the decimal points just to like keep your accuracy, as I was saying earlier. Now, okay, that's all for like the general tips just for the course overall. Now I'm going to be talking about the papers themselves more specifically. So paper 2 and 4, as I said, one lets you use your calculator and one doesn't. However, they're both 1 hour and 30 minutes long and weighted 40% of your final grade each and also 75 marks each. And I would say that people usually find papers 2 and 4 easier. So I'm just going to give you guys like some general tips on how to revise. But the key thing is just to keep on revising regularly, since math is seriously like not a subject that you can cram. Like, you should try your best to study and practice maths for most days of the week when you're planning out your revision schedule. And I'm not trying to say that you have to do 3-hour blocks of math for like 6 days a week, because that's kind of unrealistic. But you can just try to do like a few questions every single day just to like sharpen your knowledge, and then plan out some days where you do full past papers. Like, just keep continuously revising, because consistency is the key for math. And another trick to help you revise is to teach others, because I find that personally, especially for maths, it's so much easier to learn and solidify a concept in your head when you have to teach somebody else and you have to like actually fully understand it, because they ask like the most whack-ass questions. So yeah, do that. And then when it comes to completing full past papers, make sure that you are doing them under time conditions so that you can train up your time management skills and feel the time pressure. I will say though, for papers 2 and 4, it's not actually that tight on time from my experience. Like, I remember having a lot of extra time at the end to check my answers. But yeah, you just have to keep grinding until you get to the point of like feeling that your brain can work extremely fast and be able to maintain high accuracy with high speed and efficiency at the same time. And in order to get to that point, I would say just that when you're doing those practice papers under time conditions, if a particular question is taking you especially long, you should note that down and identify patterns with like why it's taking so long. Like, is it a specific topic that you're unsure of, or like are you trying to remember your table of trigonometric ratios better? Like, what is the problem here? And you can troubleshoot based off of that. Also, another key thing when doing these past papers is to learn how to maximize the amount of marks. Now, for IGCSE math papers, the key thing honestly lies in all of your working marks, because working marks actually give you a greater percentage of the total marks compared to your final answers mark, if that makes sense. But yeah, basically just write down all of your steps, organize your steps logically. Do not skip working because you think it's going to be faster. Like, not only will you have a higher chance of hitting every single working mark, but also your brain will be more organized, so you don't have to hold like 5 million things going on in your head just because you're too lazy to just write another line. So yeah, what I'm saying is that for stuff like quadratic equations, which have to deal with a lot of working, just write down all the working, okay? Like, write out the equation set up, write out the factorization or whatever formula, and then write out each substitution that you do. And yeah, just make sure that, you get everything down, and you can learn these working marks things from mark schemes just to see how marks are allocated. And the reason why you have to look at mark schemes, not just for your final answer, but for the entire working process, is because you can see like how examiners themselves are marking, because ultimately they're going to be handed the same mark scheme for your final exam. So you can see like exactly what steps are expected for you if you want to get full marks. And also another cool thing is that for the harder questions, they usually have multiple methods available. So you can see like if you're taking a longer method to do a particular question, and if there's like a shortcut to the question, then you can actually learn that from the mark scheme as well. And as you do these past paper questions, or just like topical like textbook questions in general, make sure that you keep track of your mistakes. And specifically, you should be identifying the type of mistake that it is. So typically there's only like two kinds of mistakes that I can think of. One is like based off of the topic or the question type that you're just not familiar with, or you're finding that topic difficult. So for those, I would say that you should practice more specific questions from the textbook that are directly relevant to that topic type or that question type, and keep on drilling those until you can fully master that. And also keep a screenshot of these common mistakes that you make so that you can reattempt them in the future and, just see your progress on it if you got better, hopefully. And another type of mistake is just stupid errors. So this includes careless mistakes of just writing down the wrong number, or you're just like simply misreading the question, just like stupid like human error, things like that, which is like totally normal. Like that's fine. That's what happens when you're under pressure and under time conditions. But if you are making a lot of these, it is your sign to focus more on reading the question or fixing whatever mistake that you're making, because it's so not worth it to get an easy question wrong just because of these like stupid little mistakes. And yeah, as I said, since they usually come just because you're stressed while doing a paper, just make sure that you do as much practice as possible so that you're making those stupid mistakes in your practice and not in the actual real thing. Okay, so that's all I have to say for papers 2 and 4, since they're relatively more straightforward. Like the questions are quite straightforward with like what exactly you have to do. Like you don't have to really guess like what techniques or math formulas to apply. So yeah, that's why I say it's relatively straightforward. But moving on to paper 6, which is a lot less straightforward, and I would say that people often consider this the harder paper or the hardest paper because it's a lot more unpredictable, but you get set a scenario for 2 parts of the paper. So part A is the investigation, and then this is just like the first half of the questions worth 30 marks, and this is going to be on open-ended mathematical investigation. And then the second part of the paper, part B, is your modeling paper, which is the second half of the questions and also 30 marks, and it's about applying maths to real life contexts. So the paper in total is going to be 1 hour and 30 minutes, and then each section is going to be 45 minutes. However, they don't tell you if like 45 minutes is over. So you have to be very cautious yourself about keeping track of time and knowing like how much time that you've spent on a question already. But just for tips for all of paper 6 for both parts, I would say that the most important thing is that you guys have to be reading every single line. Like I promise you, if you are reading every single line of the context that they give you and like fully just like soaking it in, you will find it so much easier. Like if you can picture the scenario in your head, it will be so much easier to like actually understand what they're trying to get you to do. And these scenarios that they're giving you are usually quite visualizable, if that makes sense. And if you're finding difficulty with that, I feel like one of the things that helped me a lot is if I drew diagrams as I was reading the context of the question, because I think that just helps you visualize it more and understand like why each part of the question is asking each part of the question. And yeah, I feel like that's the most important aspect of paper 6, because papers 2 and 4, they're more testing you on like just pure math, like giving you a question and telling you to do it. But for paper 6, you have to remember that it applies to a real life scenario, a real life context. So you always have to hold that real life context at the back of your mind. Also because some of these questions, they always like to ask stuff like, why is this model suitable for this context, or why is it not? So that's why you have to keep a good hold on what you're actually doing with the maths and not just how to do the maths, because I'm sure like the math skills themselves, they're not that difficult. It's just like figuring out how to apply it that's more of a challenge. And I think that's why people typically either do really well on these papers or really horribly, also because all of the parts build on each other. Anyway, on to my next tip, which is extremely relevant because what I wrote down here is that question parts always build on each other. And why this is extremely relevant is because if you're doing like a question part down the line, if you're finding difficulty with it, make sure that you actually refer back to the previous parts of the question, because typically for these questions with like 4, 5, 6 parts in IGCSE, they're always building on the previous things, and the previous things normally give you all the clues that you're going to need for the final part. So yeah, if you're finding it hard, just look back at the previous parts and see like why they're getting you to do what you're doing, and you can take hints from those things and apply it to the question that you're stuck on, if that makes sense. And then my next tip goes with what I was saying earlier as well, which is basically just to know how to use your damn calculator, because this is literally going to save your ass in this paper, especially because each part of the paper 6 is only 45 minutes. So if you're not understanding a scenario and you need to be more efficient with it, the calculator is literally going to save your life. And you can literally just plug the numbers into your calculator and it will do it for you. So yeah, that's that. Just make sure that you know what you're doing with your calculator and you're like not hitting the wrong buttons and stuff, and you will be okay. But my other thing is just that there's certain topics that you do have to practice harder. So one of these is going to be sequences and series, which is basically always tested in part A, like literally almost always. So just make sure that you know all your sequences and series formulas, which goes for like the arithmetic ones, also the quadratic ones, and so on, because they're always asking you to look for patterns and whatnot in whatever context that they're giving you. And then the second other important topic is going to be just stuff related to graphing in general, which always shows up in the modeling paper, because modeling in maths is literally just graphing. So yeah, just make sure that you know how to operate all the graph features on your calculator. And also when you are drawing graphs, make sure that you are drawing graphs correctly. So that means labeling all your important features such as x-intercepts, y-intercepts, turning points, lines of symmetry, coordinates, like special coordinates that are specified, stuff like that, like as the question asks you to do so. Also label your axes, the x and y's, which might not always be called x and y's, which is why you have to label them. Also, if it's a linear graph, make sure that you're drawing with your ruler. And if it's a non-linear graph, make sure that you are connecting the points with a smooth penciled curve. And yeah, those are like the main things that I would say are unique to like parts A and B. However, like that doesn't mean that you should neglect all of the other topics, because the other topics such as algebra, geometry, and statistics, they can still appear in paper 6. So like make sure that you are still ready for those and you still like know what you're doing in those. But yeah, just in general, because these paper 6 scenarios are, you know, quote unquote like really unpredictable, just do as many past papers as possible, because even if these scenarios are different, they are still recycling the kinds of questions that they're asking. They're just tailoring those different questions to the scenario itself. So as long as you do as many past papers as possible, the questions that actually come up in your exam, I can guarantee you, like they're gonna be recycled from previous questions that you've already seen from like bits and bobs of the past papers. So what I'm saying is just like make sure you spend all the time possible doing paper 6 past paper questions if that is something that you struggle with. And my last tip for paper 6, but also just like all the papers in general, is to make sure that you are sleeping like before the exam. Like make sure that you are sleeping a full 8 hours, because I'm telling you, like if you're groggy in the exam, it's gonna be like 10 times more difficult to comprehend what the scenario is saying and visualize that in your head. So if you can do anything for yourself, that is just to revise earlier, and when it comes to the actual exam season period, be on a healthy sleep schedule. So yeah, that's low-key all the tips I have for 0607 International Maths. But clearly the key thing is just to do as much practice as possible, y'all, like I'm telling you. But nonetheless, I hope this video still helped with some tips you might not have heard from your teachers or other parts of the internet, because, you know, as somebody who went through this myself, I can give you the raw, authentic experience and tips based on my experience. So yeah, all in all, I hope this video helped. As I said at the start of the video, I do have a playlist with all of my IGCSE tips neatly listed on my channel, so you can go check those out for the other subjects that you take. And yeah, now that I am done with my IGCSE subject tips video series, I'm probably gonna move on to other types of videos. So yeah, leave some ideas of what you want to see from me down in the comments below, and I'll try my best to do them. I did have an idea to like do a paper walkthrough of one of the IGCSE papers, like for example, either paper 6 or an additional maths paper. So yeah, just let me know if you want to see that kind of video where it's like me actually doing it and showing you my thought process. But yeah, if not, just tell me what else you want to see from me. And yeah, just make sure you subscribe to this channel, leave a like on this video, and turn on post notifications so you know when I post my next video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'm wishing you the very, very best of luck on your upcoming IGCSE exams. Okay, bye!